In 1990, I went to live in Thailand for the first time, and Khoi, a girl I'd met on one of my trips in 1989, she went to the airport to meet me. I wasn't very smart in these days, because she met me at the airport and kind of ambushed me, and she had this kind of garland of flowers she gave to me, and then she whisked me away to a condominium somewhere at the north end of Asok. But you know, it only took a night there for me to realise that wasn't really where I wanted to live. You know, I wanted to be near the centre of the action. So I moved down to Soi Cowboy. I just did a bit of tourism in Bangkok. I think this picture is me at the Louis Pasteur Institute snake farm. And this is my good friend Mike from England, who was already living there at that time. We used to go out on little trips, and this was one trip we did to the canals off the Chao Phraya River, and this is Mike waiting for the river taxi at Chiang, which is like the ferry terminal near to the Grand Palace. And Mike had a job teaching English at this time. Later on, I would get a job teaching English myself, and this is Mike getting ready to go off teaching. I used to see a girl called Nang who worked on Soi Cowboy, and this was taken on a day trip we had out to Wat Arun, the Temple of Dawn. In those days, Soi Cowboy was a bit of a shifty place. You used to get all kinds of people hanging out there, you know, all kinds of scammers, people who developed habits that they couldn't afford back home. And also that year, I noticed for the first time we had a few people coming in from Africa. I remember lots of guys coming from Nigeria, and they were very suspicious because they wouldn't go out anywhere. They just hang around the guest house all the time. And at that particular time, I was staying at a home sweet home guest house, and this picture was taken in my room. It's my friend Mike, myself, a guy called Frank who was a bit mysterious himself, and two of these guys who all seemed to be called Omar. Now, the local Thai police got very interested in all these Omars, and they started hanging around at the restaurant that was downstairs at Home Sweet Home Guest House, and they just hang around there, you know, like having a drink, but they were, you could tell they were kind of like up to something, you know, and doing some kind of investigation. And I just remember one evening, I just chatted to one of these Omars, and the second that this Omar had gone, the police were onto me, you know. Why were you speaking to him? What was he talking about? What was he saying? You know, so I learned that lesson very quickly, you know, that the police were onto him. And I mean, they were up to no good, you know. They'd be going on runs to different countries, you know, taking things to different places like Japan and Europe and Taiwan. And gradually they all kind of disappeared, you know. Their time came for their run. They'd go on their run, and the next day you might see an article in the Bangkok Post about somebody caught at the airport, or you might not, but you know, they're successful or not, they'd all sort of disappear one by one. Right, this was Morchit bus station in 1990, and it was a bank holiday, and of course it was really, really crowded. I remember this particular day, my friend Mike, you know, who'd seen in one of the previous pictures, had a briefcase. Well, we were just sitting down, and all of a sudden somebody grabbed his briefcase, and the person who grabbed it passed it to somebody else, who passed it to somebody else, who shot off on a motorcycle. You know, it was quite surprising how quickly it happened, and there was absolutely nothing we could do, you know, because you didn't know which person to follow. Luckily, there was nothing valuable in it. You know, they were probably very disappointed when they were opening it, but lesson learned. Now, this was on a trip up north. We went trekking up in the area of Doi Inthanon, which is the tallest mountain in Thailand, and this is a group photo of the group we had together. Part of the trek was on rafts. You know, I think, you know, probably for an hour or two, we went along on these rafts one day. And I think this photograph tells its own story. Obviously, the bridge was a bit too precarious and eventually collapsed. I'm glad I wasn't on it when it went. And this is just us going another one of these kind of makeshift bridges that they put up all over the place. And this was a rest stop on some of the hiking we did up in Doi Inthanon. This picture was taken at breakfast time, And I remember it was absolutely freezing overnight. It was one of the only times I've ever experienced 0 degrees centigrade in Thailand. Doi Intanon is so high up, you know, they've experienced temperatures as low as -8 there before. And another part of the trek was on elephant back, you know, I think a couple of hours on it was on, we were riding on the backs of elephants. Now, most people would be sitting on the kind of wooden seat thing they've got, but there were so many of us that we used to take it turns to actually sit on the elephant's neck, which sounded all right, but in reality it was really uncomfortable because these bristles on the elephant's back, you know, would prickle your legs and your backside, and you had the bones on the top of its neck, top of its legs like moving, you know, so it was really uncomfortable if you were sitting on the elephant's neck. So we used to sort of like do a shift and then switch around. Yeah, it was pretty cool, that part of the ride, you know. A lot of it was going down mountains, which was okay, except the elephants would they'd stop on a whim and just sort of start feeding on the foliage, so you'd have to wait until they finished. And part of it was through sort of shallow streams. And these are a couple of American guys we met, and they'd taken along some kind of herbal cigarettes with them, and they were on the elephant in front of us, and one of them would crawl down the elephant's back and sort of pass one of these cigarettes back. On the trek, you'd spend the night in a hill tribe village, you know, a different one each night. And this is a lady and a child I took a picture of in one of the villages. Now, in those days in North Thailand, they were pretty rare, but you still got poppy fields, and this is me posing in one of the poppy fields that they took us to. And there you can see the poppy where they've slit it to extract the resin. And this is one of the poppies in flower. While we were in Chiang Mai, we had to go to my favourite bar, which at that time, you might remember, I've already told you, was called Big Bar Beer. And this is myself and some friends of mine, Keith and Mark, having a night out of Big Bar Beer. Just another picture of Keith and Mark at Big Bar Beer. I love that place. Now, one day on Soi Si Bum Pen, we saw this flyer advertising tours to Khao Yai National Park. And these tours said that it was only 3 hours away from Bangkok, and they had various wild animals, including elephants and tigers. And I just thought, what? They got wild tigers within 3 hours of Bangkok? I said, Mike, we've got to do this. So anyway, it was, you know, we had a few days off from the teacher because it was a Songkran holiday. Now, it was the first time we'd experienced Songkran, and we didn't realise that all the migrant workers in Bangkok travelled back up to the north and the northeast, or wherever they came from. And we turned up at Hua Lumpong train station to get a train to Patpong, which is where the tours left from. And we got there, and the train station was just packed out, and we found the train that was going in the direction we wanted. But, you know, like, it was just absolutely packed. You know, there were people on all the seats, people on the floors, people standing up, and we just didn't fancy it at all. Now, at that time, I could already read a bit of Thai, and I noticed these two carriages not attached to the train, you know, just a bit on some rails a bit further out, that were marked as going in the same direction. And I just thought, well, there's a chance they might be joining on with the train once the train has left the platform. So we hopped over, and we were the only people in this carriage, and we just sat in it and kept our fingers crossed that it would join on. And eventually the train left, and it did. It reversed onto it and clicked on. So we were, that was a result, you know, we had some seats. Anyway, we got there, and we met this guy called Bunsub, who was going to take us. He was the guy who was going to take us on the tour. And we went on the tour, and Bunsub was a nice guy. He was enthusiastic, but his English wasn't that great. And I found myself kind of having to translate bits and pieces for the tourists. So anyway, at the end of the tour, he asked me what I was doing. Now, by that time, I was teaching English as well with Mike. So we were both teaching English, and Bunsub said to me, he said, look, he said, Carl, you know, he said, why don't you come and help me? You know, we'll do the jungle tours. And I wasn't really enjoying the English teaching. I was thinking, teaching English in Bangkok, you know, to students who weren't particularly interested in learning, or doing tours in the jungle, you know, looking for wild animals and tigers. So no contest. So pretty soon after that, I stopped being an English teacher, and I become a jungle tour guide with Khao Yai travel tours with Bunsub. And this is myself and my good friend Mike, who's dead now. He died, he died about 11 years ago in the floods in a ute here. But this is a nice picture of us on trail number 2 at Khao Yai. And this is a picture of us at a viewpoint not far after you enter Khao Yai National Park. And the guy in the sunglasses is Bunsub, who's the Thai guy who run the company. And this is myself at the Pa Deodai viewpoint in Khao Yai National Park with a couple of the tourists. And this is Mike with a group of the tourists. Now, you know, Mike was a real character. I mean, he used to have a little bottle of Thai whiskey in his pocket at all times, and he would get the tourists lost. You know, he'd take them on one of the trails and he'd get them lost, and he'd be pointing out animals that didn't exist. You know, I remember he once saw a slow loris and he told them it was a 3-toed sloth, which you only get in South America. But of course the tourists loved him. You know, he was value for money. He was a real character. Now, just outside the gates of Khao Yai National Park, they've got caves, and at night millions of bats fly out from them. And in those days you could actually go right up to the entrance of the cave, and this is just a kind of a makeshift seating area they put up by the mouth of the cave. As part of the tour, we take the tourists up to this cave and wait for all the bats to fly out. And there were so many of them that you could catch a bat just as simply, you know, if you held your hand out and just did that continuously, eventually you would catch a bat, which is what we're doing in this next couple of pictures. It's what Mike is doing, catching the bats. And this is one of the tourists posing for a picture with one of the bats. And I got in on a couple of the pictures as well. That's me with one of the bats. Looking at it, they're actually quite large bats. I'm not sure what type they are. But still to this day, you can watch them flying out, but they won't let you go right up to the entrance of the cave anymore. And this is just a nice little silhouettes of the bats flying out from the cave at Khao Yai. And this is a picture of Hill Sawat waterfall, which appeared in the movie The Beach with Leonardo DiCaprio. It appeared in the scene where they kind of, himself and a couple of his friends run and jump over a waterfall into the pool below. And this is Hill Narok waterfall, which is by far the most spectacular waterfall in Khao Yai. I mean, in the rainy season, it is thunderous. In those days, in the cool season, when the water flow wasn't that heavy, we used to go swimming in the pool at the bottom. You know, we used to go swimming, and you could climb up some of the rocks and dive off of them. They don't allow that anymore. And that's the view from the top of Hill Narok waterfall, you know, where the water goes over. And this is the view from the pool at the bottom when we used to be able to take people swimming there. And this is the morning mist that hovers over the jungle canopy. Now, part of our tour was we'd drive along in a pickup truck with powerful spotlights, and we just drive along the roads that go through the area, and we just shine the spotlights, and you get eye shine from the animals in the national park. Now, usually it was deer. There was always an awful lot of deer, but sometimes you'd see things that were more interesting, and you know, once every couple of weeks or so, we'd come across elephants, and elephants used to come out into the salt licks. You know, they're just patches of bare earth that are mineral rich, and the elephants and Gating Gower would come out and they'd lick it to get the minerals out of the ground. And these pictures is one day we come across this small herd of one of these elephants at one of these salt licks. And what happened was one of the elephant calves was laying on the ground, and we didn't know if it was dead or anything, but the other elephants were trying to rouse it. They were using their trunks to try to kind of rouse it, and this went on for about 20 minutes, and for a while we thought that the calf might be dead, and then all of a sudden it must have just been asleep. It just woke up, and then once it woke up they were all happy, and they just hung around for a few more minutes and then wandered off. And this is a rare photograph I got of a gibbon on the ground. I mean, you just hardly ever see gibbons on the ground. And this is a wild jungle bee's nest. Now, their honey is really valued. You know, they value it a lot more than the honey of the farm bees. And what happened was, on this particular day, one of the park rangers had seen this bee's nest up in the tree, so he climbed up it and got it. And what they used to do was they used to use the honey to sweeten their whiskey. They used to drink all the moonshine whiskey. So we sat there one afternoon drinking moonshine whiskey mixed with this wild jungle bees honey. You know, it had a very dark colour. It was delicious. And this is a giant centipede. They call it takap in Thai. And the bite is supposed to be really painful. I mean, they're absolutely horrible looking things. You know, they're all kind of jagged edges and armour plated. They're just kind of just killing machines, you know. They're so dodgy that in the villages, if they kill one, they'll cut off its head and they'll bury the head, because if one of the chickens that runs around like pecks at the head, it could bite the chicken and kill the chicken. You know, they're that dodgy. And I always remember the first time I'd been told about the carp. The first time I was told about them was by the policemen who were hanging around Home Sweet Home guest house. You know, they told me about the carp, and then about 2 months later I was outside a bar in Bangkok, and I saw all these girls scream and run out of the bar, and then I saw this red thing wriggle after them, and I thought it was some kind of snake for a few seconds, and then it stopped and I could see it was one of these giant centipedes. And a Thai guy came over with like a part of a paving slab and put it on top of it, and then jumped on top of the paving slab and then lifted it off, and, and this centipede just run off like nothing had happened. And this is the web of a kind of funnel web spider they get in Thailand. You know, I'm not sure if they're dangerous or not. And just a picture of a lizard. I think they call them ginkga in Thai. That first trip to Khao Yai was during the Songkran period, and we really didn't know anything about it. And in those days, it was a lot more laid back. You know, people would gently splash each other with water. And I just remember the first we knew about it was an old lady coming up to us with one of these silver water bowls, and she'd put some talcum powder on her face, and she'd just kind of like put her hands in the water and smear water over her face. You know, it was thinking about how crazy Songkran festival is now. You know, it was very laid back, very civilized. And that's Mike, and this is myself. Once we'd started working at Khao Yai National Park as tour guides, we were living in Patpong, and we used to go to this bar, and my friend Mike fell in love with this girl at one of the bars called Omjar. And you know, he was pursuing her, you know, over a matter of weeks, and then one day he went there and she wasn't there. And so like one of her relatives who worked in the bar said, oh, she's gone to this town, she's got moved to this town called Nam Yuen on the Cambodian border. And it was quite a journey away, but we were up for a bit of adventure, and you know, we had a weekend off. So we went following her, and Mike managed to find her, you know. So, you know, he was happy. It was worth the trip. Now this lady, I can't remember her name, but she used to be a showgirl in one of the bars in Patpong, and she had this like neat trick where she'd open a beer bottle. Enough said. I mentioned before in one of my earlier videos that back in those days, nobody really cared if you took photographs in the go-go bars. You know, it wasn't like today. Today's got the internet, and there's just, you know, people are worried that anything that's taken of them could sort of turn up anywhere, but it wasn't that way in those days. So these pictures were taken, I think they were taken in gold fingers on Patpong Road in 1990. Quite interesting to look at, you know, just like the different hairstyles and the different kind of fashion styles of the outfits, you know. It's incredible watching how skinny people tended to be back then. I think, you know, everywhere all over the world, kind of like, you know, weights are going up. Now, when it come to the summer of 1990, I decided to fly back to the UK and do a bit of work, get a bit of money together, and then come back to Thailand. Now, I'd been up in Chiang Mai trekking or something, and in those days, I used to fly with Kuwait Airways. So you had to phone up to reconfirm your flight. So I telephoned them from Chiang Mai to reconfirm my flight, and they said, well, you can't. And I said, why not? And they said, well, we've been invaded. And of course, I'd been aware of stories of troop build-up, you know, Iraqi troop build-ups on the Kuwaiti border, but that was the first I'd heard that they'd actually been invaded. And as it happens, if I'd have flown out a day or two earlier, I would have been stuck in Kuwait. I would have been one of them human shield guys. But anyway, eventually they put me onto Gulf Air, and I flew back to the UK via Muscat. I had a 9-hour stopover in Muscat, and that was the day that the first US troops arrived. They arrived at Muscat Airport on that day.